1943. The Brazilian jungle. Brazilian police surround a group of people in SS uniforms. In one of their hands is a crystal skull the size of a human head. Clear quartz bends the tropical light, sending rainbow flashes across the faces of the arrested. Agents of the Third Reich, thousands of miles from Europe, deep in the heart of South America, and with them, an artifact said to have been created by the Maya more than 1,000 years earlier. This is not fiction. It's a real historical incident, and it opens one of the strangest chapters of World War II. The Nazis hunt for mystical relics from ancient civilizations. Today, you're going to hear the story of a civilization that built pyramids without the wheel, predicted astronomical events thousands of years in advance without telescopes, and created a writing system that remained undeciphered for 400 years. We'll move from crystal skulls, the objects the Nazis once hunted for, to the real mysteries of the Maya, their blood-soaked rituals, their cosmic knowledge, and their baffling disappearance. You'll see how a Soviet linguist who had never even been to Mexico cracked their code, and why a Spanish bishop destroyed and preserved their culture at the same time. And at the end, we'll answer the big question: which Maya legends are true, and which ones are a 20th century fabrication? But let's go back to the Nazis in the jungle. These men worked for an organization with an ominous name: Ahnenerbe, or Ancestral Heritage. Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer of the SS, founded it in 1935 for one reason: to prove the superiority of the Aryan race through archaeology and mysticism. Ahnenerbe sent expeditions to Tibet, searched for the Holy Grail in Europe, and excavated ancient ruins from Scandinavia to the Middle East. Himmler believed that ancient civilizations possessed knowledge the modern world had lost, knowledge that could give the Third Reich absolute power. And among all the artifacts Ahnenerbe hunted, the Maya crystal skulls held a special place, because they were tied to a legend that could chill even hardened SS men. 13 crystal skulls. Each one is carved from a single piece of quartz, with an anatomical precision that seems impossible for any civilization without metal tools. According to legend, the Maya created them in ancient times and hid them around the world. When all 13 skulls come together in one place, they will grant their owner power over time and space, access to the knowledge of every civilization that has ever existed, and everyone that has yet to come, the ability to see the past and the future, control over the very fabric of reality. Sounds absurd? But for Himmler and the men around him, this was a real goal, one worth risking agents' lives for, even in the middle of a world war. They believed the Maya possessed technologies far beyond modern science. They believed their priests guarded secrets that could change the course of history, and the crystal skulls were the key to those secrets. But who were these people, the Maya, whose artifacts so fascinated even Nazi mystics? Where did a civilization like that come from? One capable of inspiring legends about power over time. In the jungles of Guatemala, 300 meters high, the El Mirador Pyramid rises above the forest canopy, a massive stone mountain built by human hands, 72 meters at the base. This isn't just a big structure, it's a structure with a volume of 2,800,000 cubic meters, larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. Every block was cut, moved, and set in place without metal tools, without the wheel, and without pack animals. Only human strength, agave ropes, and wooden rollers. 100% humidity, temperatures close to 40 degrees Celsius. Mosquitoes the size of coins. In these conditions, tens of thousands of builders raised a complex that covers 16 square kilometers. But the most astonishing part isn't the size. It's the date. 300 years before our era. When Alexander the Great was just beginning his conquest in Europe, a metropolis of 100,000 people was already standing in the jungles of Central America. El Mirador is not the peak of culture. It is its beginning. An early experiment that proves something important. What the Nazis mistook for traces of a lost super-civilization was really the result of thousands of years of hard work by real people. El Mirador was one city, one of hundreds, because what we call the Maya civilization was never an empire. There was never a single ruler, a single capital, or a single army. Instead, there was a mosaic of independent city-states spread across 350,000 square kilometers, the size of modern Germany, from Mexico's Yucatan through Guatemala all the way to Honduras. Archaeologists find stelae depicting captured rulers, bound with ropes, awaiting sacrifice. It was a system much like ancient Greece, a network of city-states bound together by a shared culture, language, and religion, but politically fragmented and often hostile to one another. This system lasted for almost 4,000 years. Think about that scale. From us to Christ, 2,000 years. From Christ to the first Maya cities, another 2,000. By the time Egypt was building its first pyramids, settlements were already taking shape in Central America that would become the foundation of Maya culture. Archaeologists divide this history into 3 periods. The pre-classic period, from 2000 BCE to 250 CE, the age of El Mirador, a time of experimentation with architecture, writing, and the calendar. Then comes the classic period, from 250 to 900, the Golden Age, a flourishing of art, science, and construction. Most of the famous cities reach their peak right then. The post-classic period, from 900 to the 16th century before the Spanish arrived. It was a time of decline in the southern lowlands, but of renewal in the north of Yucatan. 4,000 years of continuous cultural tradition. For comparison, the entire history of the Roman Empire, from its founding to its fall, lasted 12 centuries. Maya history is 3 times longer. Over that span, hundreds of generations came and went, dozens of dynasties rose and fell, and thousands of temples were built and then abandoned. But the Maya did not appear out of nowhere. They had teachers, a mysterious people archaeologists called the Olmecs, the people of the rubber country. The first major Mesoamerican civilization. Its peak was from 1200 to 400 years before our era. They lived along the Gulf of Mexico coast in swampy lowlands where rubber trees grew thick and plentiful, and they left behind artifacts that still puzzle archaeologists today. Massive stone heads, up to 3 meters tall, each one weighing as much as 20 tons. Carved from solid blocks of basalt with portrait-like precision. Broad noses, full lips, helmets on their heads. 17 of these heads have been found across the ancient Olmec cities. The basalt was quarried in the Tuxtla Mountains, 80 kilometers from the sites where they were installed. 20 tons, 80 kilometers, through jungle and swamp, without the wheel. The Olmecs created the region's first writing system, its first calendar, and its first ceremonial centers with pyramids. They traded with peoples thousands of kilometers away. Olmec artifacts are found from Mexico to Costa Rica, and then they disappeared. Around 400 years BCE, their cities were abandoned, their culture dissolved, but their legacy remained. The Maya adopted their writing system, developed their calendar, improved their architecture. The Olmecs were the foundation on which the entire subsequent Mesoamerican civilization grew. 4,000 years of history, hundreds of city-states, monumental structures surpassing the Egyptian pyramids in volume, a complex political system, trade networks spanning the continent. But here's the paradox that troubles historians. A civilization that lasted longer than Rome, Greece, and Egypt combined never invented the wheel for transport, did not use metal tools for construction, did not domesticate pack animals. How did a people capable of calculating Venus's movement centuries ahead fail to conceive the simplest technologies that their contemporaries on other continents had? The night sky above Copan. A priest astronomer climbs the temple steps, carrying a bark codex covered in hundreds of symbols. He knows that in 84 days, Venus will appear at dawn in exactly the predicted place. No mistake is possible. The calculations have been tested through generations of observations. This man had never seen a telescope. He did not know that Earth orbits the sun, but he could predict a solar eclipse to the minute, centuries into the future. The paradox fades once you realize what they had. A code. A mathematical language that turned the chaos of the heavens into a system you could predict. At the center of that code was a number. Not just counting, but a concept most ancient cultures could not quite grasp. 0. Emptiness as a number. Absence as a mathematical quantity. The Indians invented it independently. The Babylonians used a similar idea. But in the Western Hemisphere, only one people figured it out on their own. The shell symbol was their designation of emptiness, which was at once nothing and everything. And with 0 came the base 20 counting system. Not 10 fingers on your hands, but 20 fingers on your hands and feet. Each place in a number represented a power of 20. That made it possible to write astronomical values compactly and to work with them with striking ease. Then there was the Hob calendar, 365 days divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus 5 unlucky days at the end of the year. Its accuracy reached 99.98% of the true solar year. For comparison, the Julian calendar of the Roman Empire was off by 11 minutes a year. Over 1.5 millennia, that added up to a 10-day drift. The Tzolk'in calendar was 260 days long, a sacred cycle that intertwined with the Hob to create the 52-year calendar round. But the crown jewel of their astronomy was Venus, the morning star, the evening star, a deity of war and fertility. They calculated its synodic period, 584 days, with an error of just 2 hours over 500 years of observation. No optics, no clocks, only the eye, patience, and mathematics. The Dresden Codex contains tables for Venus's motion centuries into the future. Every appearance, every disappearance, recorded, calculated, predicted. This is not mysticism. This is science in its purest form. Observation, systematization, prediction. December 21st, 2012. The planet is gripped by panic. People are stocking up on canned food and drinking water. They're building bunkers. They're reserving spots in so-called survival arks for tens of thousands of dollars. The reason? The end of the 13th Baktun in the long count calendar. 5,125 years from the mythical start date of the current era. August 11th, 3,114 BCE. The internet is flooding with apocalyptic prophecies. Documentaries on major networks are talking about the prediction of the end of the world. Hollywood is shooting a blockbuster about global catastrophe. Travel agencies are selling doomsday tours to the ruins in Guatemala. The irony is that the priests themselves left inscriptions pointing to dates thousands of years after 2012. The stela in Palenque mentions an event that will happen in the year 4772. For them, the end of a Baktun was not the end of time. It was a transition into a new cycle, like moving from December 31st to January 1st. Festive, symbolic, but not catastrophic. Modern panic is just our own fear projected onto another culture. We took their mathematical system, ripped it out of context, filled it with our own apocalyptic fantasies, and sold it as a sensation. Priests who could predict eclipses 300 years in advance became victims of the most absurd misunderstanding of their legacy. But how did they record this knowledge? The walls of the temples are covered in signs that Europeans mistook for 400 years as primitive drawings. Human figures, animals, abstract symbols. Spanish monks called it the devil's writing, and they burned the codices by the thousands. Only 4 complete manuscripts have survived, 4 out of thousands. The rest, ash. The secret of their system was syllables, not an alphabet where each sign represents a sound, not hieroglyphs where each symbol is a whole word, a hybrid. One sign could be read as a syllable, as a whole word, or as part of a compound term. About 800 basic glyphs, each with variations, a complexity that surpassed Egyptian hieroglyphics. This script was the key to their cosmic code. It recorded not only historical chronicles and genealogies of rulers, but also mathematical tables, astronomical calculations, and ritual prescriptions. Knowledge accumulated over millennia, encrypted in symbols that seemed impenetrable. 19th century European scholars looked at these inscriptions and saw nothing but decoration. They could not believe that a so-called primitive people without metal tools could create a full writing system capable of expressing abstract ideas and complex calculations. The key was right there in plain sight, in 4 surviving codices, on thousands of stelae, and on the walls of abandoned temples. But the lock stayed shut until the mid-20th century. This was a people who invented zero on their own, calculated Venus's orbit with the accuracy of modern astronomy, and built a writing system more complex than Egypt's. It was a civilization whose priests handled numbers in the millions and predicted celestial events centuries in advance. And yet these same geniuses reshaped their children's skulls, believing an elongated head was a sign of nobility. They deliberately caused cross-eyed vision in infants by hanging resin balls in front of their eyes. They covered bodies with tattoos through painful cuts and by rubbing dyes into open wounds. What could make a people who understood the mathematics of the cosmos maim their own children for beauty? A noble warrior stands on the temple steps. His face is painted a vivid red. A cloak of quetzal feathers shimmers in emerald and gold. Jade bracelets circle his wrists and ankles, but the head is what you notice first. Long, almost melon-shaped, with a sloping forehead that pulls sharply backward. The eyes are drawn so close to the bridge of the nose that the pupils seem almost to meet. To a modern eye, it looks like the result of a genetic disorder or an injury. But to his people, it was the height of aristocratic beauty. The ideal. The standard anyone who could afford it tried to reach. Because for them, beauty did not begin at birth. It was made. Deliberately, painfully, from the very first days of life. A baby, just 3 days old. His mother straps a wooden board to his forehead. Another to the back of his head. Tight. So tight that the skin turns red and the child cries out in pain. The boards remain in place for several years. The soft bones of the skull keep growing, but not naturally. Upward and backward, squeezed from both sides. The result is a head stretched like an ear of corn. A shape that, at a glance, set nobles apart from commoners. Archaeologists find these skulls in elite burials. The deformation can be so severe that it reshapes the entire face. The eye sockets shift. The jaw juts forward. The brain develops in that altered shape but still functions normally. The flexibility of a child's body compensates for the artificial intervention. But the physical cost is enormous. Chronic headaches, vision problems, increased pressure inside the skull. All for status. So your head would seem to say, I'm not like them. I'm above them. The crossed-eye look came as a separate addition. They hung a ball of resin or wax in front of an infant's eyes right at the bridge of the nose. The child focused on it for hours, then days, then months. The eye muscles adapted to an unnatural position. By age 3 or 4, the crossed eyes became permanent, irreversible. That was not a side effect, that was the goal. Because gods, as people believed, looked that way. Eyes drawn toward the center signaled divine vision, the ability to see what ordinary mortals could not. The elite imitated the gods literally, by changing the anatomy of their own children. The body was covered with tattoos. Not quickly, not painlessly. The process stretched across years. A master made cuts with an obsidian knife, thin but deep. They rubbed dyes into the wounds, black from soot, red from cinnabar, blue from indigo. The skin became inflamed. Infections were common. Many died of blood poisoning, but those who survived carried a map of their lives on their bodies. Each symbol marked an event, each pattern an achievement. Warriors covered their faces and torsos with images of defeated enemies. Priests wore astronomical signs and calendar glyphs. Women from noble families decorated their arms and shoulders with floral motifs and geometric patterns. The more tattoos you had, the higher your status. Bare skin signaled low birth. Slaves and peasants had no right to these painful decorations. Their bodies stayed empty. Unremarkable. Jade was worth more than gold. The green stone, the color of corn and life, belonged only to the chosen few. Beads in the ears, stretching the lobes down to the shoulders. Rings in the nose, deforming the cartilage. Lip plugs pulling the mouth into a constant grimace. Every ornament made a statement. Every body modification drew a line between us and them. Color mattered too. Red was the color of war and the East. Before battle, warriors painted their faces red, turning themselves into living embodiments of the sun god. Black was the color of priests in the West, the direction of death. Yellow marked the South and maturity. White stood for the North and old age. Blue was the color of sacrifice. They painted victims blue before tearing out their hearts. That color made a person sacred, ready to meet the gods. Social hierarchy was absolute. The Halach Winix, the true man, the ruler of the city-state. His head was stretched more than anyone else's. His clothes were the brightest. The heaviest jewelry was his. Below him were nobles, priests, warriors. Lower still were artisans, merchants, peasants. At the very bottom were slaves, prisoners of war, debtors. Transition between layers was almost impossible. You were born into your caste and died in it. Your body was marked from birth so that everyone knew your place. Women lived by even stricter rules. Modesty was not a virtue, it was the law. Lowered eyes, quiet voice, No direct looks at men. No conversations without permission. Clothing had to cover the body completely, even in 40-degree heat. Violation was punished publicly, harshly. A girl who dared to raise her eyes to a man not from her family received a punishment that would seem like medieval torture to a modern person. They brought her to the square. They held the person down while a priest ground the pods of the hottest pepper, habanero or chili, in a mortar. Then he rubbed the mixture into the eyes. The pain was so intense that the victim would lose consciousness. Many were blind for days, some never saw again. This was not an exception, it was the norm, a common practice and one nobody challenged, because social order was seen as a divine decree. To break it meant insulting the gods, and the gods did not forgive. But these same gods demanded more than deformed skulls and blinded eyes. Much more. Because physical suffering for beauty and status was only the prelude to the real horror of their religious practice. If a society could treat its own children and women this brutally for the sake of social norms, what would it do for the gods? The cosmos hung by a thread. The sun might not rise tomorrow, the rains might not come in season. Corn might fail to sprout. The universe balanced between order and chaos, and only one thing held that balance in place. Blood. Not a metaphor. Not a symbol. Real human blood, spilled at a precise time, in a precise place, in a precise way. Religion touched every moment of existence. When a peasant planted grain, he performed a sacred act. When a warrior captured an enemy, he was gathering fuel for a cosmic machine. When a ruler climbed to the top of a pyramid with an obsidian knife in his hand, he was not killing. He was saving the world from ruin. The pantheon included hundreds of deities. Itzamna, lord of the heavens, creator of writing. Chak, the rain god, armed with a lightning axe. Ishchel was the goddess of the moon and childbirth. But above them all stood Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, the embodiment of wind and wisdom. His image covered the temples, a scaled body crowned with quetzal feathers, a mouth breathing out the force of life itself. Twice a year on the equinox, the sun cast a shadow across the steps of his pyramid at Chichen Itza. The shadow slid downward, forming the illusion of a moving serpent. The god was descending from the sky to meet his people, an architectural marvel calculated with astronomical precision. But these gods were not merciful. They created humans from corn dough mixed with the blood of the gods. The obligation was absolute. Return what had been given. Blood for blood. Life for life. A captive was led up the steps. 122 steps climbing toward the platform at the summit. The body is painted blue, a sacred shade, the color of sacrifice. His hands are bound behind his back. His legs are free. He must walk on his own, showing his dignity before the gods. Below, in the plaza, thousands of spectators have gathered. Drums thunder. Bone flutes let out piercing notes. Smoke from copal incense rises into the sky, carrying the prayers upward. 5 men wait on the platform. 4 of them hold the victim, 1 for each limb. The 5th, the high priest, raises a knife. Obsidian, polished to a mirror shine, is sharper than any metal blade. 1 strike beneath the ribs, precise, fast. The hand slips into the cut. Fingers close around the beating heart, a yank. The organ is torn from the chest, still pulsing, still warm. The priest lifts it toward the sky, an offering to Kukulkan, to Itzamna, to all the gods who keep the cosmos from falling apart. Then he throws the heart onto the steps. It tumbles, leaving a red streak across the white limestone. The body follows. It crashes and rolls, breaking against the stone edges until it reaches the base. There they butcher it. The meat goes to the nobles. The skull gets cleaned and added to the tzompantli, a wall of thousands of skulls displayed in full view. A reminder of how many lives were given to the gods. How many times the world was saved from the end. The ball court stretched 168 meters. 2 parallel walls, each 8 meters high. On each wall, a stone ring was fixed upright, with a diameter only slightly larger than the ball. The ball weighed 4 kilograms. Solid rubber that bounced off surfaces with incredible force. The rules were brutal. You could only strike it with your hips, elbows, and knees. Hands and feet were off limits. The goal was to send the ball through the ring or force your opponent to make a mistake. Players wore protective gear, leather belts around the waist, knee pads, elbow pads. Without them, a 4-kilogram projectile flying at 50 kilometers per hour could break bones. The game demanded almost superhuman agility. Jump, twist in midair, hit with the hip, then the ball arcs toward the ring. Miss. The opponent catches it on the knee and fires it back. The crowd roars. Bets are placed right there during the match. Nobles lose entire estates. Merchants lose caravans of goods, and the game goes on for hours. Sweat runs into the players' eyes. Muscles burned. Bruises covered the players' bodies. Every strike of the ball left a mark. But pits wasn't a sport. It was a prelude to execution. The team that lost the match, and according to some accounts, the winning team, honored with the privilege, walked to the sacrificial stone. They beheaded the captain right there on the court. One clean blow and blood shot from his neck in a fountain they believed fed the earth and made it fertile. The rest of the team met the same fate. Their skulls joined the Tzompantli. Their names were carved into the walls of the court, an eternal memory of those who gave their lives for cosmic balance. The ball game was never entertainment. It was a battle between order and chaos, played out in the physical world. Every match reenacted an ancient myth about twin heroes who descended into the underworld of Xibalba and defeated the gods of death in a ball game. Every sacrifice repeated their feat, strengthening the boundary between life and non-being. The spectators were not just watching a sporting contest. They were witnessing a sacred ritual on which the survival of all existence depended. This system held for centuries. Blood ran, the sun rose, the rains came, corn grew. For them, that was proof enough. The world kept going, so the sacrifices must have been necessary. But in 1519, men in metal armor, with crosses on their chests and muskets in their hands, landed on the coast of Yucatan. The Spanish conquistadors saw pyramids covered in dried blood. They saw Tzompantli, walls made of tens of thousands of skulls. They saw a heart torn from a living man at the top of a temple. Their horror was absolute, their disgust was sincere, and their determination to destroy this culture was unwavering. But among the conquistadors was one man who did something deeply paradoxical. He studied this civilization while wiping it from the face of the earth. His actions destroyed almost all written records. Yet it was his notes that became the key to understanding what had been lost. Who was he? And how did his obsession lead to the greatest cultural tragedy of the New World? Diego de Landa arrived in Yucatan in 1549. He was a Franciscan monk, 35 years old, driven by his faith in the one true God. He walked through the square in Mani, where sacrifices had still been taking place just the day before. The smell of copal hung in the air, mixed with the smell of blood. On the temple walls, frescoes showed gods demanding human hearts. In front of him stood a civilization built on principles that clashed with everything he believed. The Spanish did not see a culture, they saw blasphemy. Not religion, but devil worship. Not art, but idolatry. Every statue, every fresco, every ritual seemed to confirm what they already believed. These people needed saving, by force if necessary, and the bloody ceremonies became the justification. Conquistadors pointed to the Tzompantli, to the sacrificial stones, to the rivers of blood running down the steps of the pyramids. They said, "We bring light into a kingdom of darkness. We are freeing these people from the tyranny of false gods." Muskets against obsidian spears. Steel swords against wooden clubs. Horses, animals the indigenous people had never seen, trampled the defenders of the cities. The technological advantage was absolute. But to unlock the secrets of this civilization, Europeans needed a key. The problem is, the man who found it first destroyed almost everything that could be read. De Landa was no ordinary conqueror. He studied the language, he wrote down customs, he questioned priests about the calendar, the gods, and the writing system. His curiosity was genuine. He wanted to understand these people so he could convert them more effectively to Christianity. He compiled dictionaries, he sketched hieroglyphs, he documented rituals with a scientist's precision. But at the same time, he was an inquisitor. A fanatic who believed that saving souls justified any means. In his mind, those two roles did not clash. If anything, they reinforced each other. To root out heresy, you first had to study it. To replace a false faith with the true one, you had to understand how the false one worked. De Landa was methodical. He organized auto-defés, public burnings of idols. He destroyed temples. He punished those who secretly continued the old rites. Torture was standard practice. Suspension by ropes, stones placed on the chest, red-hot coals. The goal was simple: forced confessions of idolatry, secret rituals, and possession of forbidden objects. Indigenous people died under torture. Hundreds, maybe thousands. No one knows the exact number. De Landa didn't bother to keep that kind of record. July 12, 1562. The town of Mani, the main square. De Landa ordered everyone to gather every book, every manuscript, every codex they could find. People brought them out of hiding, from caves, from burial sites, from secret caches. Bark pages covered in thousands of glyphs, astronomical tables, historical chronicles, religious texts, medical treatises, genealogies of rulers, prophecies. Each book represented decades of observation, generations of accumulated knowledge. They stacked them into a heap, a massive pile in the middle of the square. De Landa delivered a sermon. He spoke about devilish signs, false gods, and the need for purification. Then he raised a torch. The flames seized the first pages. The fig bark burned fast and bright. Smoke rose into the sky, black, acrid, filled with the ash of burned knowledge. The indigenous people stood around him and wept. Some tried to throw themselves into the fire, desperate to save even one book. Spanish soldiers held them back. Astronomical calculations burned, calculations that predicted the movement of Venus centuries into the future. Historical records burned too, along with dynasties, wars, and alliances. Medical knowledge went up in flames, plants, poisons, remedies, and so did the myths. Stories of creation, of twin heroes, of a journey into the underworld. How many books burned that day? De Landa never gave an exact number. Modern estimates put the number at between 27 and 40 codices. But that was not the only act of destruction. Across the Yucatan, bonfires burned. In every city, in every village, the Spaniards searched for manuscripts and destroyed them. The result was catastrophic. Only 4 codices have survived to this day. 4 out of hundreds, maybe thousands. The Dresden Codex contains astronomical tables. The Madrid Codex records rituals and prophecies. The Paris Codex holds calendar calculations. The Grolier Codex consists of fragments whose authenticity is still disputed. That is all that remains of a written tradition that lasted more than 2,000 years. But the story took a brutal turn. In 1566, De Landa was summoned to Spain. He was accused of overstepping his authority and of extreme cruelty. Even by the Inquisition's standards, his methods were too harsh. So, to defend himself, he wrote a book. Report on the Affairs in Yucatan was a detailed account of the culture he had helped to destroy. He described the calendar, he explained the number system, he sketched the hieroglyphs and assigned them phonetic values, at least the ones he could find out from his informants. He documented the rituals, the architecture, the social structure. The book was his defense. Look at the evil I was rooting out. Look at the darkness I was pushing back. But it became something more. Centuries later, when scholars tried to decipher the writing, they discovered that almost all written sources were destroyed. Only the stones remained, stelae, altars, murals. But how do you read a language when there isn't a single bilingual text, not a single dictionary, not a single key? The answer was found in De Landa's book, in his notes on the phonetic values of the signs, in his sketches of calendar symbols, in his descriptions of the rituals that helped explain the context of the inscriptions. The man who burned the libraries left behind the only guide to reading them. The executioner became an unwilling keeper. The destroyer became an archivist. Without his book, decipherment would have been impossible. With it, it was still monstrously difficult. The writing went silent. The hieroglyphs on the stelae turned into decorative patterns. No one could read them anymore, neither the Spaniards nor the indigenous people themselves. The tradition was broken. Priest scribes died without passing on their knowledge. The schools where writing was taught shut down. By the next generation, no one still remembered how to read the signs of the ancestors. For 400 years, the stones remained silent. Archaeologists found cities covered with inscriptions, thousands of texts, on temple walls, on stair steps, on altars, on ceramics, but all of them were mute. 19th century scholars tried to decipher them. They proposed theories. Maybe these were ideograms, like Chinese characters. Maybe they were purely decorative symbols. Maybe they were astronomical codes. Every attempt failed. The language remained dead. But in the middle of the 20th century, something extraordinary happened. A Soviet linguist who had never been to Mexico sat in a Leningrad library with copies of the 3 surviving codices in a book by Delanda. He had no field experience, no access to the original monuments, no support from Western colleagues who believed the problem was unsolvable. But he had a mathematical method that overturned everything people thought they knew about writing. How did a man trapped behind the Iron Curtain crack the code that had defeated the best minds in the West? Leningrad, 1952. Yuri Knorozov sits in the reading room of the public library. In front of him are photocopies of the Dresden Codex. Pages covered in hundreds of signs like strange little drawings. Beside them, a worn copy of Diego Delanda's book, written almost 400 years ago. That's all he has. No expeditions into the jungle, no consultations with Western experts, no access to the original monuments. The Iron Curtain cut him off from the world of science, as completely as the Spanish bonfires had cut the world off from knowledge. But this 28-year-old linguist was about to do what no one had managed for 4 centuries. He was going to make a dead language speak. The problem seemed unsolvable. Western scholars had spent decades trying to crack it. They tried reading the signs as ideograms, symbols that stand for whole concepts, like in Chinese. It didn't work. They tried looking for astronomical codes. Maybe it was just numbers and dates. Another dead end. Some people even thought the markings were nothing more than decorative patterns, without meaning. The language stayed silent. Stubbornly. Absolutely. But Knorozov saw what everyone else missed. He spotted a pattern, a simple one, a mathematical one, an irrefutable one. In the Dresden Codex, there are about 350 different signs. Too many for an alphabet. Alphabets usually have only 20 to 30 letters. Too few for a purely ideographic system. Chinese writing has tens of thousands of characters. 350 sits right in the middle. And that number is exactly what you'd expect from a syllabic writing system. These are systems where each sign stands not for a letter or a whole word, but for a syllable, a combination of a consonant and a vowel sound. Japanese kana works the same way. Around 50 symbols cover the basic syllables, plus a few variations. Knorozov realized that this script was neither an alphabet nor a set of ideograms. It was a syllabic alphabet, proving it was harder. He needed a key, a way to test the hypothesis. And that is where Delanda's book came in. The same monk who burned the libraries left behind a table. He called it an alphabet. He would show an indigenous man a sign and ask how it was read. The man answered with a sound, and Delanda wrote it down. In the end, he produced a table of 29 signs with phonetic values. Western scholars dismissed it as useless. They tried to force it into an alphabet, and it didn't work. The words wouldn't form. Nothing made sense. They decided Delanda had made a mistake. The Maya had fooled him. The table was junk. Knorozov saw something else. He realized Delanda was asking the wrong question. The monk pointed to a glyph and waited for the name of a letter. But the Maya reader did not see a letter. He saw a syllable. When Delanda pointed to a sign that looked like a turkey head and asked, "What is this?" the Maya answered, "Kuts," the word for turkey in their language. Delanda wrote down, "This sign equals the sound ku." But in fact, the sign stood for the syllable ku. The difference seems tiny. It was revolutionary. Knorozov took the word kuts, turkey, and found its image in the codex. Next to the bird's image stood 2 signs. The first was the very one Delanda had recorded as Q. The second was another sign from the table marking the syllable ties. 2 syllables, 1 word, a perfect match. Checked other words. Again and again the system worked. The signs carried syllables. The syllables formed words. The words made sense. The code had been cracked. In 1952, Knorozov published an article in a Soviet scientific journal. The title was modest, Ancient Writing of Central America. The content was explosive. He proved that the writing system was syllabic. He gave examples of successful decipherment. He showed his method. This was a breakthrough, a discovery of the century. It should have upended the entire field of Mayan studies. Instead, the Western academic world responded with silence. Then came ridicule, then outright rejection. At the head of the opposition stood Eric Thompson, a British archaeologist and the leading authority on the culture. He had devoted his life to studying their civilization. He had written dozens of books. He built a theory that writing was purely ideographic, that it conveyed abstract concepts, not the sounds of speech. Knorozov's theory destroyed that work, made it obsolete, wrong. Thompson attacked. He wrote scathing reviews. He called Knorozov's method pseudoscientific. He argued that the Soviet linguist couldn't understand the culture because he had never been to Mexico. He said the syllabic system was far too primitive for such an advanced civilization. And Thompson had enormous authority. His word carried weight. Western scholars followed his lead. They ignored Knorozov's work, didn't cite it, didn't discuss it. The Iron Curtain worked both ways. The Cold War reached even archaeology. To admit that the Soviet scholar was right would have meant admitting the superiority of Soviet science, and politics mattered more than truth. Ideology was stronger than facts. Knorozov kept working. He published new papers. He decoded new texts. Again and again, he proved he was right. But in the West, no one listened, or rather, they did not want to listen. Then 20 years passed. A new generation of researchers started testing Knorozov's method. Young American epigraphers applied his approach to the inscriptions on stelae. It worked. The text began to read clearly. The names of rulers, the dates of battles, the descriptions of rituals, everything started to make sense. Slowly and reluctantly, Western scholarship admitted it. The Soviet linguist had been right. Thompson had been wrong. The writing system really was syllabic. By then, Knorozov was living in a communal apartment in Leningrad. His salary was modest, his conditions were Spartan. The only luxury he allowed himself was a Siamese cat named Aja, who sat on his shoulders while he worked on the text. When colleagues in the West finally invited him to a conference in Guatemala, he saw the pyramids for the first time, the very ones whose inscriptions he had spent 30 years studying. He was 58. The triumph came late. But it came. Today, we can read those inscriptions. Stories of kings carved into stone, priests' prophecies preserved in codices, chronicles of war cut into the steps of temples. The voice of a civilization that had gone silent for 4 centuries spoke again. Thanks to the persistence of one scholar who refused to give in to the impossible. Thanks to mathematics, which proved stronger than politics. Thanks to a method that turned mysterious patterns into a living language. But deciphering the text opened a new mystery. Now we know what they wrote about their gods, their kings, and the movement of the planets. We can read their calendars and their prophecies, but some mysteries were not recorded in words. They were carved into stone as images. Take the lid of the sarcophagus of the ruler Pakal of Palenque, for example. A carving that many consider a portrait of an astronaut in the cockpit of a spacecraft. If we can now understand their language, why can't we still explain what this image means? Solar eclipse is accurate to the minute. Venus in the sky in 84 days. A calendar more accurate than the European one. But no wheels. No plows. Not a single horse, ox, or donkey to haul cargo. Blocks weighing several tons were dragged on wooden rollers. By hand with muscle power, centimeter by centimeter. They worked the fields with sharpened sticks. Cargo was carried on the backs of porters bent under the weight. That isn't just odd. It goes against the entire logic of technological progress. A civilization that could calculate the length of the solar year to within a fraction of a percent never came up with the wheel. A people that built aqueducts and water reservoirs never invented the plow. The engineers who built pyramids as tall as a modern 15-story building moved stones the same way their ancestors had 3 millennia earlier. 1952. Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruz Luillier descends a narrow staircase inside the Temple of the Inscriptions in Palenque. The steps lead down into the body of the pyramid. The air is stale, humid. The walls are coated with limestone deposits, the result of 13 centuries of rainwater seeping through. Ruz Luillier has been excavating here for 3 years, clearing rubble, breaking through the stone blocks that the ancient builders had deliberately used to seal the passage. At a depth of 25 meters, he reaches a massive triangular slab. Behind it, a burial chamber, a sarcophagus made from a single block of limestone, 5 tons in weight. The lid is covered in bas relief. an astonishingly intricate carving that shows a figure surrounded by symbols and ornament. Inside are the remains of a man who stood about 1 meter 73 centimeters tall. He died at around 80 years old, an incredible lifespan for that era. His face is covered with a jade mask. Jade beads rest in his hands. This is the ruler Pakal the Great, who died in 683 AD. But the world did not remember his remains. It remembered the image carved into the sarcophagus lid. The central figure sits in a half-reclined position. Its body leans back. Its arms reach forward as if it is operating something. Beneath the figure is an object packed with detail. Curved lines, geometric forms, and what looks like flames bursting upward from below. Above the head, there is a complex structure with crossing elements. For archaeologists, this is a classic scene of passage into the afterlife. A figure falls into the mouth of an underworld monster, a symbol of death. Above it, the world tree, linking the 3 levels of the cosmos. The bird at the top is a heavenly messenger. It is standard iconography, found on dozens of other monuments. But in the 1960s, the Swiss writer Erich von Däniken saw something else. He saw an astronaut in a rocket cabin. The seated figure was the pilot. Its hands rested on the control levers. Below it was an engine with a nozzle blasting out a jet of exhaust. Overhead was an instrument panel. Even the pose seemed right. Leaning back, like astronauts at liftoff, when the force of acceleration presses them into their seats. And with that, the theory of ancient astronauts got its icon. Proof that the ancients saw technologies they could never have created themselves. That someone flew to them from the heavens, taught them, showed them, flew away, leaving memory in stone. The 8th century CE. The classic period is at its height. Tikal, Copan, Calakmul, Palenque. Dozens of cities stand at the peak of their power. Their population runs into the millions. Trade routes connect the coasts. Art reaches extraordinary heights. But by the 9th century, the collapse begins. One city after another, the cities empty out. Construction stops. The last dated stelae are 899th year in Tonina, 909th in Palenque. Then silence. The jungle swallows the plazas and temples. Vines coil around the pyramids. Trees grow through the roofs of palaces. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, the great cities had already been dead for 600 years. Nature had hit them with a drought, the worst in the last 7,000 years. Lakes dried up, rivers shrank, corn stopped growing, reservoirs ran empty, famine cut down the population. The survivors fled north toward the water sources. The cities died of thirst, or they destroyed one another in wars. Inscriptions on the stelae are filled with reports of battles, captivity, and executions. Rivalries between dynasties escalated into total war. Resources were exhausted, trade collapsed, the elite fell, peasants scattered. The system broke under the weight of its own aggression. Or maybe an epidemic wiped them out. An invisible enemy they had no defense against. A disease brought in by traders or warriors. It spread from city to city, devastating palaces and huts alike. Priests could not stop it with rituals. Rulers could not save themselves with wealth. Death was democratic and merciless. Decipherment gave us the voices of kings. Tombs gave us their faces. Excavations exposed their cities, but one major mystery still has no answer. Technologies that should not have existed. Images that don't fit the frame. A collapse whose causes are still debated. And over all of it, the shadow of the crystal skulls that began this story. Artifacts the Nazis hunted. Relics that were supposed to prove the existence of a lost super-civilization. But what if the most famous artifacts linked to this people had nothing to do with them at all? The British Museum, 1997. The Scientific Analysis Lab. On the table under a harsh light sits a crystal skull, the very one SS agents once hunted in the Brazilian jungle. Transparent quartz, flawless polish, anatomical precision. Legend says ancient masters carved it from a single crystal, spending decades on the work and passing their tools from one generation to the next. But today, this artifact is about to meet an enemy no legend can survive, the electron microscope. The researcher leans into the eyepiece. 2,000 times magnification. The quartz surface begins to reveal its secrets. and what he sees destroys the myth instantly. Parallel grooves, perfectly even, too even for handwork. Spectral analysis dispels the last doubts. The quartz was not mined in Central America. The deposit is in Brazil or Madagascar, regions from which, in the Victorian era, European jewelers imported raw materials for expensive trinkets. The crystal skulls, which the Nazis scoured the jungles for, which mystics declared the heritage of Atlantis, which were supposed to prove the existence of an ancient super-civilization, are forgeries. Skillful, expensive, beautiful, but forgeries. They were crafted in the workshops of Paris and London in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, when European audiences were hungry for the exotic and willing to pay for it in gold. Not a single crystal skull has ever turned up in a controlled archaeological excavation. Every one of them surfaced on the antiques market with a murky backstory. They are all products of their time, an era of colonial fantasies and romanticized ideas of the noble savage. But while 19th century hoaxers were carving souvenirs out of Brazilian quartz, the real wonders stood in the jungles of Yucatan, waiting for their moment. Chichen Itza, the Pyramid of Kukulkan, 9 tiers rising to the temple at the top. 91 steps on each of the 4 sides, 364 in all, plus the upper platform. 365, the number of days in a year. No coincidence. This is a calendar carved into stone. Twice a year on the spring and autumn equinoxes, the sun rises at a precisely calculated point. Its rays slide across the pyramid's north face at just the right angle, creating the illusion of motion. The shadow crawls down the steps, forming the body of a giant serpent. 7 triangles of light and shadow connect with the stone head at the base. Kukulkan descends from the sky to his people. The light show lasts exactly 3 hours and 22 minutes. Then the serpent disappears until the next equinox. 21st century engineers armed with computers and laser measurers have confirmed it. The calculations are absolutely precise. Change the angle of the pyramid's faces by a fraction of a degree and the effect fails. Get the alignment to the cardinal directions wrong and the serpent will not appear. The builders had no blueprints in the modern sense. No theodolites. Not even metal tools for precise stone carving. And yet, they created an astronomical instrument that has worked flawlessly for 13 centuries straight. Cholula, Mexico. A hill covered in grass and trees. At the top stands a Catholic church built by the Spanish. Tourists pose against the colonial architecture, never suspecting what they are standing on. Beneath them lies the largest pyramid in the world. Not the tallest. That honor belongs to Khufu, the largest by volume. 4.5 million cubic meters. A base 450 by 450 meters, 18 hectares of ground. 18. The Pyramid of Khufu fits inside its own outline with room to spare. Construction began in the 3rd millennium BC. It went on for 1,000 years. Generation after generation, new layers were added, the base was expanded, and a maze of inner tunnels and chambers was built. When the Spaniards arrived in the 16th century, they didn't understand what they were looking at. They decided it was a natural hill, so they built a church on top, symbolically declaring the victory of Christianity. The irony is that they raised their temple on a foundation that outclasses anything they ever built in both scale and engineering complexity. Real achievements don't need mystification. They don't need stories about aliens, Atlantis, or magic crystals. A civilization that invented zero independently from the rest of the world. The civilization that could predict eclipses centuries in advance, without telescopes. The civilization that created a writing system decoded by a Soviet linguist from photocopies in a Leningrad library. The civilization that built cities in the jungle where every building was an astronomical instrument, and every plaza a stage for rituals linking Earth and the cosmos. The Nazis searched for proof of a lost super-civilization and found Victorian-era forgeries. Mystics searched for signs of ancient alien contact and found burial symbols, misinterpreted through the lens of 20th century science fiction. The real miracle had been there all along, in the pyramids that have stood for 1,500 years, in the codices that survived the conquistadors' fires, in the mathematics that dealt with concepts medieval Europe could not even grasp. Greatness isn't found in crystal skulls. It's found in the fact that real people, without steel, without the wheel, without written contact with other civilizations, created a culture that still makes us ask questions today. And the most important one isn't who helped them. It's how did they do it? Because the answer says more about human potential than any legend about gods from the heavens ever could.